To tell the truth, Fire Emblem Engage is a game that I was both excited for and a little bit cautious of. I'm a huge fan of the series, and counting remakes, I've played every game in the franchise. I've only missed Gaiden and Mystery of the Emblem. So when a new Fire Emblem was announced, I was so ready. Now, what some people may not know is that the summer before Engage came out, there was a supposed Fire Emblem leak that I was so sure looked obviously fake, with a seemingly unrealistic design for the protagonist. I was so sure that I was even convinced that the protag was just an edit from the SMT5 protag, only to be shocked to see that very same game months later in the direct. Then, as trailers came, I began to notice similarities to Fire Emblem Heroes, which, depending on who you ask, can be a good or bad thing. Personally, I like Heroes, but I wasn't sure if I wanted that for a Switch game. The protags at the time still looked weird to me, and being more like Heroes made me worried that it would be a very simplified game. So I hope that you can understand why I was a little cautious. However, every Fire Emblem game has been a wonderful time that is still just as fun on a replay. As a huge fan of the series, I wasn't just gonna skip it, so I just had to trust Intelligent Systems to make another good game. And let me tell you, while it's not perfect, they definitely delivered. Alright, so first impressions. Engage is a very beautiful game. It's very colorful and vibrant. I know it's been said and compared a lot, but visually it's such a step up from Three Houses, which was a lot more darker and the textures just weren't as good. Although if I'm gonna compare the two, then I gotta bring up the fact that Three Houses' intro song, Edge of Dawn, is so much better than the one we got in Engage. This one just kind of felt like a 4Kids intro, if you ever watched those growing up. It was basically the intro to like a Saturday morning cartoon, and I just couldn't get into it. I heard it like 2-3 times, and then I just ended up skipping it every time since. It just wasn't for me. I much prefer the more serious ones. Now getting into the game, I played it first on hard mode, which is actually something I recommend for people who've played Fire Emblem before, not just in Engage, but in general. From experience, I feel like normal mode, in an attempt to make it more accessible, takes away map features or gimmicks sometimes. And if you want to experience everything the game has to offer, I usually recommend hard mode once you're more comfortable with the franchise. And specifically with Engage, hard mode was a really good difficulty. It wasn't too hard in the early game, but I definitely ended up thinking more and more as the chapters went on, which is something you really want from a strategy game. And as a disclaimer, I played through my game before there were later updates and DLC, so I don't have those additional features in mind. And I know they added some pretty nice quality of life. I just personally didn't get to experience those at the time of this recording. Alright, now on to the early game. Compared to the previous protagonists, this one's design just wasn't my style and didn't leave a good first impression on me. I wasn't huge on the contrasting hair colors of the red and the blue with the all white clothing. It just was a little bit much for me. And I know I talked about the vibrancy of the game as a good thing, but this one time I will say it was a little bit too vibrant. However, those were my initial thoughts. Later on in the game, they explain it and they give you lore reasons why you have two different hair colors and why it's so contrasting. And after it's explained, I actually started to enjoy it. Over time, I started to get used to it, but lore really helped me accept it. Now I don't have any problems with the design. And that's honestly a good way to get me accepting of things in games. If the lore makes sense, then I'm okay with it. While on the subject of first impressions, the fell dragon design in this game is pretty cool. It's just this dark purple black snake design with a cobra hood. It has a hand tail kind of thing. Now this looks pretty cool. It's very different from the other dragons we've seen as enemies before, like the shadow dragon and Grima, and honestly points for uniqueness. It's been 17 games, and this is the first time I looked at a fell dragon and thought that looks different. But anyways, the story starts and you're introduced to your character as a divine dragon who's been asleep for 1,000 years. Your mother is the queen / god figure that all these other kingdoms worship, which is a very interesting take on the protagonist, because we've had divine dragons before in Tiki and Fae, but they're more plot-centric characters who are side supporting roles. But this is the first time that it's been a main character. It's very different. We are also introduced to your retainers. Being a divine dragon, you have 3 people who watch over you all the time. The first one, Vander, is just your butler basically, and I think he's pretty cool. It's the Jagan archetype, which is this stoic old man. But the other two I wasn't that huge on. I think their names were Clan and Fram. They're like these twins, and honestly, I just started calling them the cheerleaders, because that's kind of all they are. It sounds a little harsh, but I just couldn't really get to like them. And trust me, I really wanted to like them. And we're also introduced to like the main gimmick of Engage, which are the emblems, which are like these ghost soldier slash power-ups of past Fire Emblem characters that help you out in fights, and which honestly I thought was a fun idea, since I loved seeing the past characters show up in 3D with moves and references to their games and how they played in those ones. I will admit that it made me really happy to see. They're kind of like ghosts where they're transparent, they float, and they talk about their lives and like the past tense like it already happened. But on the other hand, they act like they're alive. They don't even say they're dead, and it's never really explained all the way, so it's kind of up to the interpretation of the player. And another huge bonus for me was that one of the earliest emblems you get was Sigurd from Genealogy of the Holy War. And for the people who know me, Genealogy of the Holy War is like my favorite game, probably like a top game in general, not just of Fire Emblem, and I was excited. My one wish was for Sigurd to be a good emblem, so I was really happy to see that not only did they give him Canto, or I guess they call it Canter in this game, but they gave him Canter and extra movement, and both of those are always really good in Fire Emblem, so I was excited that he was going to be a really good unit, or I guess a really good emblem. On initial impressions, engaging seemed like it would be a very broken mechanic, and the more I played, the more it was very clear that yes, it was a very broken mechanic. However, I excuse it because it not only gave you more options, but it was fun. And those are the two more important things when it comes to playing a game. You want to have options and you want to have fun. So I didn't really mind that it was broken if it let me move like 12 tiles in one turn or teleport to an enemy instantly. Back to the plot. Not long after getting to know your mother, you're instantly attacked by these evil forces, and during the combat, the mother dies. Which, honestly, I felt that it happened all too soon, because I didn't feel a lot of emotion from what was supposed to be a very sad scene. Kinda just felt like a Mikoto speedrun from Fates. Similar things happened, but I feel like I got to know the mother from Fates a lot more than I got to know your mother from Engage. So as weird as it is to say, Fates did it better in terms of story in that regard. Somehow it's just Fates redemption year, I guess. But anyways, with the mother dead, the story truly starts and we go off to collect the emblem rings before the Fell Dragon does. Before we go, we are introduced to the Somnial, which is basically like the monastery from Three Houses. It's like a hub world, and all your units after combat will meet there and just live life. You can talk to them, you can buy, sell items, forge weapons. It's a lot more condensed than the monastery was, but, and I know this was changed later in updates, it just felt like chores and chores and chores, and not much really to do there besides like micromanage things. And although it was less than the last game, I still prefer the Fire Emblem games that don't have it. I don't know, maybe it's like a popular additional feature that new players really enjoyed, but I honestly could do without it. Eventually it just devolved to do the arena, get materials, cook your food, and then leave to the next chapter. And when that happened, it started to feel like padding. However, the Somnial does also come with Somi, the little dragon dog friend we meet, so it's still kind of worth it. From here on out, Engage kind of follows a cycle. You go to a kingdom, then you quickly meet the royalty, you get new emblem rings, then you recruit some new units, and then you leave. You don't stay in any kingdom for any longer than like 2-3 chapters, and honestly it's kind of a downside because I don't really have attachments to any of the kingdoms. Like, I could tell you all about the royalty of the kingdoms, but when it comes to the kingdoms themselves, like Fyrene and Brodia, the first two kingdoms, I don't really have a lot to say about them. One has flowers and likes tea, the other have fighters and they have rocks. Now, if you've seen anyone talk about Engage before or played the game yourself, you would know that Chapter 10 is when a lot of people feel that the game really kicks off. And honestly, I could see why. I think Chapter 10 and by extension 11, since they're connected, are probably some of my favorite chapters in the game. Chapter 10 starts with like a high stakes, like 3 boss fights in the same map, one after another, and it ended up being the first time I had to actually reset a chapter. Which, I mean, if I'm being fair, I wasted like half my times pulses on like little details that didn't matter, not realizing I was gonna have to fight 2 more bosses later in the chapter. But still, it was a nice ramp up of difficulty that didn't feel unfair. If anything, it just added more to the challenge and I really enjoyed it. Which then led to possibly one of my favorite escape maps in Fire Emblem, like in the history of the franchise. We're chased down by like 4 of the Fell Dragon's like top generals and his child, and they do such a cool idea that they take away our emblem rings and make us fight without them for the first time in the game. And it was such a great merge of storytelling and gameplay, because from a storytelling perspective, they said that like we relied too much on the emblem rings and we didn't stand on our own. And from a gameplay perspective, yeah, at that point I was just relying on them so much, shooting all these cool buildings one after another. I didn't think they would take it away since it's the whole gimmick of the game. And having to escape without it while the enemies had our emblem rings added so much to the chapter that I really appreciated. So now that the party has fled into the desert, they need to find a way to get back their old rings. And it's once again, meet some royalty, get more emblems, recruit some new units, and then leave in like 3 chapters. We unfortunately don't get to see the desert country for that long, which is a real shame because desert countries are some of my favorite in fiction, and this group is possibly some of my favorites in all of Engage. I really liked Fogado, I really liked Panette, I really liked Tamara, which really started to make one complaint I have about the game apparent, is that the deployment limit in this game almost feels like too small half the time. The character limit feels even worse when you have recruitable units, because for every recruitable unit on the map, you have 1 less slot you can bring. So unfortunately, while I added Panette and Fogado to the team, I had to leave Tamara on the bench, which is too bad, but I guess that's what replays are for. After we get our desert units, we start to get rings back one by one, starting with Sigurd and Leaf, which I was happy with. And honestly, it felt like we lost our old rings for a while, because it's been more than a couple chapters at this point, and I was beginning to wonder if we would have to wait till the end of the game. This opens a whole new segment of the game, which is possibly one of my favorites in like the entire playthrough, which are the paralogs. Now the paralogs are really cool because they're remakes of old maps from the past games, chock full of cool references of units and bosses that you encountered when you played those back on the old consoles. And honestly, it was really satisfying as someone who's played through all these maps to see what I could remember, and when map gimmicks would show up, I would actually have a heads up because I'd be like, I remember reinforcements came on this part of the map, or this happened and I do not want that to happen again. So overall, it was a really cool fan service or nostalgia for returning players who remembered these chapters. Some of the high points when completing these paralogs were things like Ike. In his paralog, he just punches a whole building down to the ground, and I don't know why he does that. He doesn't do that in Path of Radiance, but it was really cool to see. I know the Sigurd paralog, as biased as I am, was probably one of my favorites. There was just so much like references that I was able to pick out. You had to seize the castle. There was like a hidden item on the beach. It was kind of weird that it wasn't like a Sigurd map. It's technically a Sleeth map, but I didn't mind because it was just a really cool thing to see genealogy maps in 3D. And I remembered I noticed on the bottom left of the map was a representation of Julius and Ishtar. And that was really cool because they had a lot of health. They were like level 20 when I was level like 5 to 7. And I decided when I noticed them, I was going to do the best I could to defeat them before finishing the map. And I had to use like all my resources. I had to dancing. I had to use like Korn's Dragon Fang. I had to do so much gang up, use like the backup feature. I had to like master all the features on the spot to make sure I defeated Julius and Ishtar in one turn, and it was really satisfying. I think it was like one of my favorite moments throughout the whole playthrough. I'd say the paralog with the most detailed to the previous entry would be the River Thracia map, which is Leaf's paralog. That had like ballistas everywhere, unfortunately, just like the old maps. All the ballistas were special. They had like 80 hit. There was so much staff debuffs like freezing, there was break staffs. There's so many brave units everywhere. There was a big cav line that represent like Reinhardt and his group of thunder mages. And I was even afraid that there was going to be enemy trading because some of the enemies had items that they just couldn't use. And I was sure they were going to trade like in Thracia. But at that point, I was kind of just being paranoid. And they even destroyed the bridge like Sias does in the chapter. And when they destroyed the bridge, that's when I realized there has to be like a developer on the team who just really likes FE4 and FE5 because those paralogs had so much detail. And unfortunately, not all paralogs were equal in their references. I remember when I saw the Fates paralog, Ryoma is a sword master, but he has like 11 sword and like no magic, so he does nothing. And I was like, wow, that's unfortunate because all the other references are cool and like accurate to the character, and then we got like no damage Ryoma with 11 sword. It was unfortunate, but I guess one of the devs just really likes certain games. Now, back to the story again. Once we got all the rings back, we try to fight the Fell Dragon, and we actually end up losing, which kind of surprised me. And then they hit you with a twist I wasn't expecting, is that we are Fell Dragons, we're not a Divine Dragon. And honestly, I kind of like that twist, because not only did it throw something I wasn't expecting, but it also explains why our hair is split down the middle, red and blue. Because the red is supposed to be because we were like an evil dragon with red hair, and then we became half a good dragon with blue hair, so that's why we're down the middle, blue and red. And I said before, lore just fixes everything, so it was at that point when I was completely okay with the design. And it also makes the Fell Dragon's other kid, Vale, our sibling, which adds more to the fact that it was also shown that she wasn't actually evil, she was just being controlled. So now we have like a motive to want to save our sibling and defeat our father, the Fell Dragon. And just as everything begins to line up, we actually die. And not just like a fake out death either, we like see the afterlife, we're gone. Vale, our sister, is able to make us temporary like a zombie, like an undead, because she has power over the dead. And we have a temporary chapter where we're like a dead unit. And it was honestly shocking, but I kind of liked it. But then we're turned into an emblem ring, so we're not technically dead anymore. And it still brings up the question like whether emblems are ghosts. Now that we're an emblem, they name drop Fire Emblem like they always do in these games. So our character is the Fire Emblem, which is honestly like, some people like to make fun of it, and I think those people didn't realize that every Fire Emblem game has a name drop of this is the Fire Emblem. So it's a little corny, but it's kind of a staple at this point. Honestly, the end game could have been right here and I would have been okay with it. But they stretched it out just a little bit by having like 3 more chapters to do, like cut off some loose ends here and there. The first being we have to end the Hounds once and for all, who we fight over the course of like the second half of the game. They're like the top 4 generals of the Fell Dragon. There's only like 2 left, so this is like the last time we fight them. And honestly, they got a pretty good final scene in my opinion. I was expecting just to kill them and be done with it, but then they got like this whole like kind of sad cutscene, not in like a redemption kind of way, and you don't really feel too bad for them because at the end of the day they're still bad people. But honestly, it was enough to make me feel something, and although it wasn't deep, it worked and I kind of liked it. I'm glad they didn't even like try to redeem them. They just kind of gave them closure and finalized, alright, they're gone now, they're out of the story. After the Hounds are defeated, we, for plot reasons, go back in time for 1 chapter, in which case we end up fighting ourselves as an evil Fell Dragon 1,000 years ago. It was interesting to see, but like, I don't know, in some ways it kind of felt like filler. I didn't really need to see it, but it was interesting. I will complain though that it had some whack avalanche mechanics for some reason. There was an avalanche that would sweep the map. You had to be in front of rocks to not get swept away, when I feel like we should have hid behind them and avoid the avalanche that way. I will always rant about that. I feel like that's not how it should have worked. But anyways, we fight ourselves and we kind of show the past self that we don't have to be evil, kind of setting up our future in almost like a paradox kind of way. With the time travel shenanigans taken care of, we only have 1 more chapter before endgame, and after hyping it up and building it up a lot, they pull like a whole, now you have to fight your revived mother who is forced to serve the Fell Dragon. And honestly, I know they're trying to go for some like really feelsy sad, but just like how I couldn't get into feeling that bad when she died the first time, I didn't feel that bad having to fight her because I just didn't have a connection. My character was sad, but I didn't feel much anything. Which is too bad because I'm normally a sucker for forced sad fights. And plot-wise, I don't think it needed to happen. I feel like they just wanted it to happen. Like they wanted something sad to have for feels. And it was okay, but I have seen much sadder events in Fire Emblem, and I was kind of hoping for just a little bit more. With everything taken care of, it's finally time for endgame, and there's a cool lineup with every past protagonist up to the current protagonist, and it just is a really cool scene. I realize that the intro scene from like the first minute of the game never happens, but as weird as that is, I'm okay with trading that for this lineup because it just is a really cool shot. There's a cool mechanic that the Fell Dragon, he summons dark emblems, which is like bosses from every Fire Emblem game as emblems. And honestly, it's what I was hoping for going into this game. I was hoping there'd be more like evil people who are emblems that we had to fight. And it made it for a really cool finale, if a little bit tedious, because I had to make sure everyone who I wanted to see conversations happen. So if a boss spawned on the other side of the map, I would have to change my units where they're going, only to keep doing that back and forth for like 30-40 minutes. However, it was worth it because a lot of the conversations were really cool to see, you know, fan service for someone who's played these games before and knows these characters. I'm just not sure if I'll do it in multiple playthroughs. With the big bad defeated, he starts to explain that what he really wanted was to find his emblem ring, which he called the Emblem of Foundation. Basically, he lost it one day, it disappeared, and he's been trying to find it ever since. And it kind of just made me wonder, like, who is the Emblem of Foundation? Because they don't ever explain it, and maybe they will in the DLC later, but as of right now, we just have to guess. I was wondering Foundation, maybe it's like Henri, who's like Marth's ancestor. There's maybe like short stories about him, I believe. Another option I thought of was maybe it's Alir. Maybe they're the Emblem of Foundation, like in some weird time loop shenanigan, or it's like because they started it all, it comes back to them, because we're emblems now. I don't know. Another funny option was like, what if it's Kaga? He's the foundation of the series, is the creator himself. I'm probably looking too into it. Maybe they won't ever say who the Emblem of Foundation is. A part of me really hopes it's Kaga, but I know it won't be. Reaching the end, I really like the credits art. A lot of it was really well done, and I don't know if it's available anywhere online, but I'll probably be looking for them just to save because they're really nice art. I was very also shocked that 2 characters like died in their ending. For some reason they decided to kill off Alfred, which made me kind of sad because I kind of liked him. He wasn't that good of a unit, but I liked him as a bro. And Mavier, who like turned his life around, he's no longer bad, he's a good guy now. They say he dies too, and I was like, why? Why do that to me? It kind of reminded me like Game Boy endings where like Canis died and like Nino vanished. I did not expect them to like do that again in modern games. They recently announced all the emblems that are DLC, and unfortunately there's no Salif for Alm, which is kind of needs I wanted, but oh well. Honestly, it was just a really fun time. There were so many times that just felt like peak Fire Emblem. I didn't really use like the smash mechanic that much, but everything else I made sure I utilize a lot. However, I will say that this is the worst fog has ever been in the Fire Emblem game, because you can't move into it, and that's pretty annoying. Oh, I haven't even talked about crit animations. Crits in this game was a lot like the Game Boy crit animations, where it was a lot cool, quick, flashy animation, and it was really nice to see in 3D since Three Houses crits were very simple and subdued. The one nitpick I have about animation in this game is Ragnall and the Binding Blade. Their effects are kind of just like little pew pew beam moves. They don't really look like Ragnall and the Binding Blade. Like the Binding Blade just looks like a basic fire tome, and Ragnall for some reason just like shoots like pulse grenades, not even like a shockwave effect. It's a nitpick, but I couldn't help but notice. And the music. Overall, it was really good music. The Solm fight song probably gets the award for the best new song, but a lot of my favorites were the remixes of the old songs, purely for nostalgia. I know I'm biased on it, but every time I started a paralog, I would put the controller down and just listen to the song for a little bit, and just see how they sound with like the new remixes. I 100% recommend this game. It was just really fun. While the story was a little too simple for some people, it worked with what it had in my opinion. Even if you just don't care for simple stories, the gameplay alone is good enough to have a really fun time. And to me, that's what Fire Emblem Engage is at the end of the day. Fun. Thanks so much for sticking around. This is the first video I made that wasn't like a 30-second meme video, so I'm sure I've lots to learn as I do more of these in the future. I can definitely think of a few games or movies that I'd love to talk about once I get to them, and I might even consider light novels and manga as well. There's tons of stuff to talk about that I've yet to read or watch, so recommendations are always appreciated as well. Till the next one, later!